Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses, Crazy Quilting and Beyond. My name is Lisa Boney and today we're going to create something beautiful. In today's episode, we're going to take the block that we made in the last episode and we're going to add some stitching. We're going to talk about choosing threads and colors, and I think we're just going to have some fun with some basic stitches. Now we're ready to begin stitching on our Crazy Quilt block. Because I want this block to be part of a project that I think might be used as a lap quilt, something that'll be cozy to snuggle up with, I'm not going to be adding any extra types of embellishments. It's just going to be embroidery. And I'm going to use mostly that same assortment of threads that we looked at earlier when we talked about basic crazy quilting supplies. On this block, where it's pretty busy, there's a lot of print fabrics in this, and it's going to be hard to see the stitching anyway. I really want a lot of contrast. Let's see where we're going to start first. I'm just going to do a variety of very basic embroidery stitches on this. Things like feather stitching, herringbone, maybe some chevron, maybe a fly stitch, maybe some chain stitch, we'll see, maybe a buttonhole. Those are kind of the core stitches that are used in crazy quilting, and I think I want to just do these seams all in those. In order to stitch on this, I want to make sure I'm using threads that you can actually see. So I want some contrast. So on something that's blue and green, I would probably want something that's maybe pink or yellow, but I have yellow right next to it, so yellow's not a good option. But I could also use a brighter green. I could choose to use maybe an orange, maybe even a brighter yellow, or maybe I would choose a darker blue. That would show up pretty brightly. There's a little bit of red on this block, but as I look at the red on other things, I'm not sure how well it will work. So we're going to keep it in the stash. We'll see how it goes. There's purple in the block with some of these flowers that kind of have a purplish blue or periwinkle tint. I'm not sure how well the purple will go. We'll see on that one as well. There's a bright pink. That's a pretty cool pink, so it's probably not going to get used, but look how well it goes with that finch. So we'll just wait and see. So I think I'm going to start with one of my long seams like this one right here. And you know, I actually kind of liked that orange along that. So when you put that orange along there, I think it's going to show up against the yellow. It'll pull the orange of these flowers through, and it's going to show up really well on this. I also liked this bright green, but it blends in too much and you don't see it as well. So I'm cutting my thread at 30 inches. I could use all 6 strands. That's going to give me a pretty bulky, it'll stand up a little bit better on the surface, or I can cut it down to a smaller amount. And I think I'm going to use 3 strands on this, so I'm going to separate it. Starting off, I've separated 3 strands out, so I have another one ready to go. So I'm going to start off on this long seam. Remember, this is the one where my seam wasn't straight, so it's got a little fold over here. So I really want to hold that down well. I'm going to use one of my favorite stitches, which is called a feather stitch. So I'm going to start on the back. I have my basted line showing the edge of the block. I don't want to start out here, but I don't want to knot right here where I'm likely to be sewing the blocks together later on. So I am going to go out just 1/8 of an inch or so on the other side of that line so that my knot's not on the seam line. And that's just going to help me prevent a little extra bulk. So I'm going to use what is just a regular feather stitch, And so on this one, it staggers a little bit from side to side across the seam. I use the seam as sort of a guideline, and I'm catching my threads. So the point of the V's, one is on one side, the other's on the other side. I come straight across and up. And I will be doing more detailed videos on how to do these stitches at a later date. But I just wanted to show you a little bit with some basic stitches as we go. And I'm holding the fabric out taut with my fingers. You can also use a hoop or a frame. There are a lot of people who prefer one method over another. I tend to do a mixed variety. For a small project like this, I often just hold it in my hand. All these bright colors, they're just so much fun. And usually when people think of crazy quilting, they're saying, oh, don't use prints, don't use so many colors, that it gets chaotic and fun. But it depends on the project. It depends on what you're doing. Remember, no hard, fast rules. What is the end result that you're looking for, and what can you use to achieve those results? So when I get down here and I'm almost at the end of my seam, if I end it right there, I'm missing a stitch and it's very obvious. So I am going to come up and finish that stitch, and it takes it just as far outside of that seam line as it did on the beginning over here. And so while this doesn't show up tremendously, it's when you're looking at it, it is there. And so it's going to be fun just to have all these different stitches. So there's that orange. Let's see what's next. I think this one here could use some yellow. I think it'd be good to pull some yellow through. That's a color that's not down in this area. So do I want to go that bright, or do I want to go a little bit more muted? I think the bright is too bright. I think I like this one better. Yeah, let's try that one. So let's use a herringbone. Again, I'm going to come up just 1/8 of an inch away outside that seam. That helps carry that seam through the thing. And this is just basically like a wide cross stitch. And the trick to doing nice herringbone is these lines always need to remain parallel to one another. And again, I don't mark. I'm just going to eyeball it. And if I pull my thread up and hold it, then I know that I'm maintaining that parallel. It makes it easy. make a knot. I don't worry about knots on the back of this. This is all going to get enclosed in something else. I think yellow would go really well along this seam. So let's see, what stitch do we want to use on that? That might be a good spot to use a buttonhole stitch. So buttonhole stitch, again, starting just outside my basting line. I'm going to use the seam as my guide. I'm going to stagger this one. So it's going to have a high and a low. But they're all going to be about the same distance apart. And here I don't have quite enough. I'm just going to come down and finish right here against that seam. Turn it over. Third seam is already done. I always leave a little tail on these because I figure that way it helps prevent them from coming loose. I think we need to add another color here, and I may actually go into my stash and see if I can find some of this coral pink thread. I think we need that. So I found a number of threads that will potentially work on this block. When I match this color, I'm coming up with this one, but it's a pretty dusty color, as is this one. They're a good match. You can hardly see the thread when I lay it across, but they don't have that element of bright that everything else has that we're using in the block. So then I found this one, which is a brighter pink. It goes as well. It's a little bit on the cool side. It's okay, but it doesn't send me. But then I found these two, and while this one is bright and darker, and it's definitely darker than that, it's in the same tones, but it goes pretty well with some of these other pinks that are on here. And I kind of like that one. I think it would be a nice contrast in the block. I also found this brighter pink one. And so again, it's lighter than that color. It's a little bit cooler, but it picks up again in some of these others. And that one will work well. So I'm a little torn as to which one I want to use here. I actually think gotta play with this here. I'm just not sure. Let's work on maybe this seam along here. Do we want this color or do we want this color? But gosh, you know, that shows up really well. Let's use the dark one. So I think I'm going to do a chevron stitch, but I may do it so that the bottom of the chevron is just barely inside the seam on this piece of fabric. So I'm going to start over here on this edge. And with chevron, it's very similar to herringbone. We're going to start with a little straight stitch and come back halfway on that straight stitch. And now we're going to make triangles. And this can vary a lot. You can have steep little triangles or wide, low triangles. I'm going to go, maybe a little bit steeper and higher, closer together. So we'll see. So this is one of those where you want to try and keep a nice straight line on both sides. Again, whichever angle I start off with here, I want to maintain those angles parallel the whole rest of the way. And if I start off with them uneven, I can make that a design element, or I can try and keep my triangles even-sided. And I do want them a little bit more symmetrical rather than asymmetrical on this one. So I'm still just using 3 strands of embroidery floss. So this is where I've made that little bar stitch. So I pulled it up so I know where I'm coming out. It's going to the middle of the bar. See if you can see that a little easier, the middle of the bar. And then I come back part way. And now I'm going to make my straight bar and come back to that meeting point, which is my halfway point. You can see my little straight stitch. Now I'm going to run my thread down parallel to that one. Drop it just under that. Now I'm making that little half back stitch, a straight stitch with another little half back to the center. I'm going to do that all the way across. And I really love the way that turned out to be the perfect color. It picks up the brighter pinks in the block, in the other places of the block. So it worked out perfectly. I need to think about what I want to do on these seams. Do I want blue here? Or do I want this bright green here? What do you think? I think I want the blue. I think I'm going to like the blue there better than the green. So we haven't done a fly or fern stitch yet, so I think that one might be a good option. If I start this back at the seam, I'm crossing underneath here, and it just gets a little confusing. I'm actually going to start it at the other seam stitching. I think it'll be a little easier. It'll seem like it ends in a better spot. So this one is kind of a two-part stitch. So we're going to put a straight stitch in, and then we come back on either side and make a V. And we're catching that V with the beginning of our next straight stitch. You can do this one really close together, you can do it far apart, you can do it so the legs are uneven. Most of these stitches have so many wonderful variations. The trick with fly stitch is you want to make sure that the tops of each of your V's is pretty even and that the length of the legs is pretty even. I'm just pleased with how this is coming out. The stitching is not the most obvious part of this, but it definitely adds interest and texture to it that's going to be a lot of fun. So now I think I need to work on this line here, and I think I'm going to use all embroidery thread on this quilt. So I think I'm going to bring in some green up at that top. So I think let's do a zigzag chain stitch on that one. It's a nice simple stitch. It's one of those that's stunning, and it sort of takes up a little bit more space. So I'm going to make a big chain. They're going to be about 3/8 of an inch, somewhere between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch long. And so we work back and forth, up and down to make that chain. And again, we want them all parallel with the ones going previous. So because I can't lay a thread out, I'm laying my needle out and seeing that my needle is parallel to the last stitch. So now we just have these 3 little seams to go. I'm really happy with how that turned out. I think the block is balancing so nicely. I think we've got a great array of colors. I don't think I want to add any other colors to this. I think I want to continue using the same colors. So over here, I think we're going to stick with that darker coral pink. So I wonder if it would be good to have a slightly different buttonhole over here. Again, maybe going into this block. So this one, I think I'm going to do an alternating buttonhole. So it's going to come off each side. And I think we need to pull in the yellow here. I think that's going to be the one that we need here. So this one, I think I'd like to use another feather stitch on this one. I've used feather stitch here. Fly stitch is similar, but it's different. And even the buttonhole stitch is related to the feather stitch. But for this one, we're going to do a slightly different variation. We're going to do a straight feather stitch. So this one is going to have the straight leg that comes down the seam, and we're going to go off each side. And in fact, I'm going to turn this into a maidenhair, which means I'm going to do 2 off to each side. And then we're going to come down and do 2 on the other side. So it's got this straight leg that goes all the way down the center, and then two legs. With maidenhair, you want the tops of your stitches to be relatively even. This might be the spot to do our simple little cross stitch. Work one direction first, and then go back and work the opposite direction. So. There we are, one completed crazy quilt block. Let's put our frame around it. There we go. Now we have our frame around it. You can see the entire block. All the seams are stitched. The colors are there. We've got our threads that we're using. We know exactly what we're at. So now for all future blocks, my decision-making process is so much simpler because I have the threads that I'm going to use. I've used 5 colors of thread. We have the orange, the variegated blue, the kind of deep coral, the bright green, and the yellow. And that's all we need. So from here out, the rest of this project is going to go by so quickly. I can't wait to see it. When we get to the point where I have all the blocks made, we'll take a look then at how we're going to piece it together and compile it into this little lap blanket. Thank you for watching today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, click on the bell to be notified of new episodes, give me a thumbs up down below, and I'd love to hear your comments or questions in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Happy stitching. Let's go create something beautiful.